Welcome to NIFTY's Targeted PD Seminar Series. The purpose of these seminars is to provide a review in content, instructional activities, and share NIFTY best practices. These seminars are useful for teachers who have recently gone through NIFTY University, as well as for veteran teachers looking for content and teaching refreshers. On this webinar, we will describe analyzing primary research. By viewing this seminar, you will be able to review primary research methods and how primary research supports the business plan, describe how to gather, organize, and analyze data to inform decisions, and finally, identify NIFTY best practices and suggestions for teaching and evaluating student work. Before we discuss analyzing data from primary research, let's review NIFTY's units of learning. Students learn about primary research in Chapter 7, Section 1 of the 11th edition textbook. This falls in our second unit of learning. What's important to note here is that primary data specifically affects almost every single aspect of the business plan, including the idea itself, how much you decide to price it at, and how you market to your potential customers. Take a moment to review the learning objectives for the market research unit of learning. You may notice that using primary and secondary sources to determine a market size is explicitly outlined in the first objective. In addition, knowing how to conduct and use primary research affects all of the other objectives. Students cannot gather and analyze information on their target market, competition, or understand the impact of market trends without knowledge and practice of primary research methods. Strong market research, and specifically primary market research, leads to important analysis that impacts much more than the market research unit of learning objectives. It impacts other key business plan decisions, including the marketing and promotional plans, pricing strategies, and even refinements to the actual business opportunity. So what is primary data and how can we collect it? You may recall that primary data is new information that is collected for a particular purpose. This is information that an entrepreneur needs that may not already be published or may be very specific to his or her business. In general, you can collect primary research in three ways: interviews and surveys, focus groups. These are group interviews with potential customers, or observations. Traditionally, in the NIFTY program, students conduct surveys to understand potential customer needs and wants. When teaching students about primary market research, it's important to keep in mind that the ultimate goal is to not just have them learn how to create surveys, but to get them to actually understand how to collect their own research and use that research to make decisions for their businesses. We use the market research cycle to help organize and provide a process for students to follow. Before we can get to analyzing research, though, we need to look at how students can gather and organize the data they collect. Let's review the case study we were introduced to in NIFTY University, Ava's Edibles. If you recall, Ava Tan wants to start a personal chef business in Columbus, Ohio. Like many students, she has a good idea, but not much direction on where to start the research process. In the first part of this case, you helped Ava determine her research questions and helped her to identify where or how she could find this information. In the second part of this activity, the one we will discuss here, she decides she is ready to hear from her potential customers, using surveys as her primary research method. Specifically, she wants to figure out what working adults want in a healthy prepared meal, the quantity of food they expect, and what they'd be willing to spend. She comes up with a list of preliminary questions listed on the slide here. Ava looks at her preliminary list of questions and refines them by including options for respondents to select from. This will make collecting information easier for Ava, take less time for respondents to fill out, and ultimately make it easier for Ava to analyze her research. In your classrooms, once your students have developed their survey questions, you actually want them to collect completed surveys. On this slide, we show you two examples, one that's more traditional, a printed version approach of the survey tool, and then on the right side, you can see one that we did an example in Google Forms. Many students these days are using online tools to develop their surveys. This makes it easier for them to collect more surveys by posting on social media and collecting through email. For the purposes of this webinar, we are using 5 respondents as our sample size. In your classrooms, you should try to have students collect as many responses to surveys as possible, with a minimum being around 30. So let's take a look at the data that we collected. Here, we're assuming that we handed out in a traditional format surveys to potential customers and had them respond, and then we put this information into an Excel sheet. The vertical axis here, you can see, has the respondent numbers 1 through 5, and the horizontal includes the questions by number 1 through 6. So right now we're still in the sort of gathering phase of this information, but we can also already begin to see some trends. For example, most people have not used a personal chef service. That's question number 2. If your students opt to use Google Forms or another survey tool, many of these are linked to Excel sheets or can export simply to an Excel sheet. So once students collect or once somebody responds to a Google Form survey, that information automatically goes into an Excel sheet that students have already, so they can skip one step. Now that we've gathered our information, we can begin to organize it in different ways other than by respondent. This can help make analysis go pretty quickly. Here in our example, we used Excel and grouped by question number 2, have you ever used a personal chef service? This shows us that 3 out of the 5 respondents in our sample have never used a personal chef service. So this is one part of analysis. We got to analysis quickly by using the Excel to manipulate the data and look at it differently. For you in your classrooms, this will be particularly important, especially if your students have more data and different types of data. So if they're looking at things like demographic data, they can look at it differently and start to analyze trends. So let's look at what we learned from our example and our sample data. So we learned that 80% of the respondents are willing to pay $11 or more. 40% of respondents have used a personal chef service. 60% of people eat out 1 to 2 nights a week. 80% include at least 2 items in a home-cooked meal. And 60% believe they eat healthy. Now at this point, Ava can do different things with the information. This is the point at which she takes this analysis and makes decisions for her business, or she can even go back and drill down further on her survey and ask more specific questions. Organizing the data is really great, but again, that last step of analyzing the data is really important, and it actually helps students engage not only their market research skills, but also their math skills. They're using fractions to identify how many out of the total number of people want their product. They're creating percentages. They can also, as you can see in this slide, begin to chart and look at sort of what it looks like as a pie chart or graph. If you use Google Docs or Google Forms, what you'll see is you have the option, your students can actually see this both visually and then also do the math components. So here, for students that are more visual learners, it could be very beneficial to use something like Google Forms to collect your data. In this webinar, we used Google Forms because it's free, but there are many other survey analysis tools that you can use with your students. Things like Survey Gizmo, SurveyMonkey, Client Heartbeat. All of these give students a template in terms of the types of questions they can ask, help students organize that information, and also then analyze it. You may want to first have students do an activity like Ava's Edibles first in the classroom to practice, and then use one of these tools for their own survey collection and for their own data collection purposes. Let's review the NIFTY instructional method and the tools we provide to help students conduct and analyze primary research. In this review, we used Ava's Edibles Case Study Part 2. You can find this example in NIFTY University Slides, Day 2, PowerPoint 2. You can also use another activity called the chocolate bar activity. For primary research, Part 2 specifically is helpful in against analyzing and using that research. In this activity, similar to the one that we did today, students collect information and data and then use this information or analyze it to make decisions about new packaging and marketing for the chocolate bar company. The second step in the instructional method is processing and connecting the learning to the text and resources that NIFTY provides you to teach students primary research. You can use the workbook and chapter PowerPoints to help augment your lesson. Step 3 is guided instruction. In addition to using Ava's Edibles case study, you can use real-life businesses and show student examples as exemplars for your students. To more formally assess learning, you can use Performance Task 2B and reteach where necessary. You can use the class and have students peer reteach as needed as well. Finally, the ultimate connector and demonstration of learning is the student's individual business plan. This shows their mastery and understanding to apply the concepts that they learn. Here are some next steps that we would recommend to close out this session. Reread Chapter 7.1. It's great for content review, but you can also find some additional examples and activities to integrate into your classroom. Review the primary research PowerPoint from NIFTY University. That's Day 2, PowerPoint 2. Look through the experiential activities that we covered in this session, as well as assessments for additional support. You should check out and interact with online survey tools like SurveyMonkey and Google Docs that are great resources for you to use with your classrooms, not just for the business plan, but could be great for something like the buying and selling activity. Finally, one of your greatest resources is your program staff. They can be excellent co-facilitators, bring in knowledgeable guest speakers, and also bring in some great case studies and additional tools to augment teaching analyzing data in your classroom.